Episode 2: Historical Foundations of Modern Psychological Approaches. Introduction: A Turning Point in History. Welcome back to Mind Diagnosis Lab. In this episode, we continue our journey through the origins of modern psychology by diving into the fascinating evolution of how we understand and treat psychological disorders. From the grim wards of 19th century hospitals to the rise of psychoanalysis and behaviorism, the story of psychology is one of both scientific discovery and ethical missteps. It is also a story about society's growing compassion, scientific rigor, and struggle for moral accountability. Today, we examine the transition from mystical and religious interpretations to empirical and theoretical frameworks that continue to shape the field of mental health. This episode is more than history. It's a reflection on how ideas evolve, why evidence matters, and how power must be wielded with care in the name of healing. Section 1: From Bedlam to Biology, Tracing the Roots. In the early 19th century, mental illness was still poorly understood, and treatment varied widely, from humane care to outright abuse. Bethlehem Hospital in London, commonly known as Bedlam, was notorious for its chaotic environment. Though it was originally founded to provide care, by the 1700s and 1800s, it had become a place of public spectacle where the wealthy paid to observe patients. Despite these grim conditions, some physicians attempted to make sense of what caused mental disorders. One of them, Dr. William Black, published records in 1810 indicating that half of the causes listed for patients at Bedlam were biological, ranging from heredity and head trauma to physical illnesses like fevers. The other half were psychological, intense grief, heartbreak, or religious delusions. Only a small fraction, about 10%, were attributed to supernatural causes. This suggests that even before neuroscience, physicians were leaning toward naturalistic explanations and were starting to distinguish mental illness from spiritual possession. It was a crucial moment in history when empirical observation started challenging superstition. Though primitive by today's standards, the classification of symptoms based on life events or physical ailments laid early groundwork for the biopsychosocial model. Section 2: The Biological Revolution, Linking Disease and Mind. One of the most transformative discoveries in psychiatry came from the study of general paresis of the insane, a condition characterized by delusions, dementia, and eventual paralysis. This mysterious disorder affected thousands in the 19th century and was often misdiagnosed as schizophrenia or madness. The turning point came with advancements in microbiology. Louis Pasteur's germ theory established that diseases were caused by microorganisms, and in 1905, scientists discovered that syphilis, a bacterial infection, was the cause of general paresis. This connection between an infectious disease and psychological symptoms was revolutionary. It showed that mental illness could originate in biological pathology, specifically brain damage. This breakthrough catalyzed a shift toward biological psychiatry. If syphilis could cause delusions and dementia, then maybe other mental disorders had physical roots. Researchers began exploring brain chemistry, neurology, and heredity. Though many hypotheses were still speculative, the credibility of mental health as a legitimate branch of medicine was firmly established. Section 3: Genetics and the Shadow of Eugenics. As interest in biology deepened, researchers turned to genetics. One of the early figures in this movement was Francis Galton, a polymath and cousin of Charles Darwin. Galton coined the terms nature and nurture, and was among the first to propose that psychological traits, including intelligence and mental illness, could be inherited. However, Galton's theories laid the foundation for a troubling ideology: eugenics. He believed that society could be improved by encouraging the reproduction of those with desirable traits and discouraging or preventing reproduction among those deemed unfit. In the early 20th century, the eugenics movement gained significant momentum in the United States and parts of Europe. Between 1907 and the 1970s, over 60,000 people in the US were forcibly sterilized. many of them patients in psychiatric hospitals. These actions were legally sanctioned by decisions like Buck v. Bell, 1927, in which the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of involuntary sterilization for people with intellectual disabilities. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes notoriously stated, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." This dark chapter in psychiatric history underscores the danger of uncritically embracing biological determinism without ethical safeguards. It remains a cautionary tale about the misuse of science and the vital role of human rights in healthcare. Section 4. Radical biological treatments, from insulin to lobotomy. As the biological model of mental illness gained traction, it fueled the development of increasingly aggressive treatment methods, many of which were rooted in good intentions but caused significant harm. Desperate to alleviate the suffering of patients with conditions like schizophrenia and severe depression, psychiatrists in the early 20th century experimented with radical somatic therapies. One of the earliest was insulin coma therapy, introduced in the 1930s by Viennese physician Manfred Sackel. Patients were injected with large doses of insulin to induce hypoglycemic comas, which were believed to reset brain function. Although Sackel claimed success in over 70% of cases, subsequent reviews revealed inconsistent outcomes and high mortality rates due to seizures, brain damage, and coma. Nonetheless, insulin shock therapy spread quickly across Europe and North America, before gradually being abandoned. Another major development was electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, first administered in 1938 by Italian psychiatrists Ugo Cerletti and Lucio Bini. Unlike insulin therapy, ECT did not rely on drugs, but instead used controlled electric currents to induce brief seizures. While early ECT sessions were often terrifying and performed without anesthesia, today's version is much safer and remains a highly effective treatment for severe depression, particularly when other methods fail. ECT's controversial history illustrates how stigma and outdated practices can obscure the value of genuinely helpful interventions. Perhaps the most infamous of all biological treatments was the lobotomy, popularized by Portuguese neurologist Egas Moniz. The procedure involved surgically severing connections in the frontal lobes of the brain, regions associated with personality, judgment, and impulse control. Though initially hailed as a miracle cure, Moniz even won the Nobel Prize in 1949. Lobotomies often left patients emotionally blunted, cognitively impaired, or permanently disabled. American physician Walter Freeman further popularized a more brutal variant, the transorbital lobotomy, performed by inserting an ice pick-like instrument through the eye socket. Tens of thousands underwent this procedure before it fell out of favor in the 1950s, with the advent of psychotropic medications. This era of treatment reveals both the desperation of the time and the dangers of unchecked medical authority. While rooted in a desire to help, these methods often prioritized control over care and experimentation over empathy. Section 5. The rise of psychological models, from hypnosis to talking cures. Parallel to the rise of biological psychiatry was the emergence of psychological models that emphasized the mind's role in generating and relieving symptoms. This evolution began with Franz Anton Mesmer, an 18th century physician who believed that psychological distress was due to imbalances in an invisible force he called animal magnetism. Although his theatrical treatments, often involving iron rods and dramatic gestures, were discredited, Mesmer's ideas laid the groundwork for hypnosis, a technique later adopted and refined by physicians and psychologists. Jean-Martin Charcot, a renowned French neurologist, brought credibility to hypnosis by using it to study hysteria, a disorder characterized by physical symptoms like paralysis or blindness, without any known medical cause. Charcot demonstrated that such symptoms could be induced or relieved through suggestion, highlighting the mind-body connection. His work bridged neurology and psychology and helped shift understanding of mental illness toward psychological mechanisms. Charcot's influence extended to his student Joseph Breuer, who treated a young woman known as Anna O. Her symptoms, hallucinations, paralysis, and muteness, were believed to stem from traumatic memories. Brewer's treatment, which involved helping her recall these experiences under hypnosis, became known as the cathartic method. While the accuracy of Anna O's cure has since been debated, her case became a pivotal moment in the development of the talking cure. This idea was expanded upon by Brewer's protege, Sigmund Freud, who laid the foundation for one of the most influential and controversial schools of thought in psychology. Section 6. Freud's psychoanalysis, the unconscious takes center stage. Sigmund Freud transformed the way we think about the human mind. Departing from the idea that mental illness stemmed solely from biological or spiritual sources, Freud proposed that psychological distress arises from unconscious conflicts between different parts of the psyche. These parts include the id, instinctual desires, the superego, internalized societal norms, and the ego, which mediates between the two. According to Freud, unresolved conflicts, particularly those rooted in childhood, can manifest as neuroses, phobias, or obsessive behaviors. To manage this internal turmoil, the ego employs defense mechanisms such as repression, denial, projection, and displacement. These mechanisms temporarily protect individuals from anxiety but often distort reality, leading to dysfunction over time. Freud's treatment approach, psychoanalysis, sought to bring unconscious material to conscious awareness through techniques like free association, dream interpretation, and the analysis of transference, where patients project feelings onto the therapist that stem from earlier relationships. Though criticized for its lack of empirical support and heavy reliance on sexuality, psychoanalysis introduced several concepts that remain foundational in clinical psychology today. The role of unconscious processes, early development, and the therapeutic relationship. Freud's work inspired generations of thinkers, both supporters and critics, and catalyzed a broader exploration of the mind beyond observable behavior. Section 7. Beyond Freud, Jung, Adler, and New Directions. While Freud laid the foundation for psychoanalysis, his successors expanded, revised, and even challenged his ideas. Among them, Carl Jung and Alfred Adler stand out for their innovative departures from Freudian orthodoxy. Carl Jung, originally Freud's protege, developed a school of thought known as analytical psychology. While Freud emphasized sexual drives and childhood conflicts, Jung introduced the concept of the collective unconscious, a shared, inherited reservoir of memories and archetypes common to all humans. These archetypes, such as the hero, the mother, and the shadow, appear across cultures and are expressed through myths, dreams, and art. Jung also placed a stronger emphasis on the spiritual and existential dimensions of the psyche. He believed that personal growth came from the process of individuation, where individuals integrate the conscious and unconscious parts of themselves to achieve psychological wholeness. His work laid the groundwork for spiritual psychology, dream analysis, and even influenced areas like art therapy and mythology studies. Alfred Adler, another early collaborator of Freud, took a more social and goal-oriented approach. He rejected Freud's emphasis on sexuality and instead focused on feelings of inferiority and the drive for personal mastery and social belonging. Adler introduced the idea of the inferiority complex, suggesting that much of human behavior stems from efforts to overcome perceived weaknesses. Adler also highlighted the importance of early childhood experiences, particularly birth order and family dynamics, in shaping personality. His work foreshadowed cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, by emphasizing how irrational beliefs and social disconnection contribute to psychological distress, and how they can be challenged and changed. Together, Jung and Adler broadened the field of psychoanalysis to include culture, spirituality, and social systems, paving the way for future integrative and humanistic approaches. Section 8. Behaviorism, psychology enters the laboratory. By the early 20th century, Dissatisfaction with introspection and psychoanalytic theories gave rise to behaviorism, a movement that focused exclusively on observable behavior and the laws of learning. Behaviorists argued that psychology should be a natural science like chemistry or physics, measurable, objective, and based on experiments. Ivan Pavlov, a Russian physiologist, laid the groundwork for this approach with his discovery of classical conditioning. In his famous experiments, Pavlov rang a bell before feeding dogs. Eventually, the dogs salivated at the sound of the bell alone. This showed that organisms could learn to associate neutral stimuli with meaningful ones, a principle later applied to human behavior. John B. Watson, the father of American behaviorism, extended these findings to humans. In a controversial experiment known as Little Albert, Watson and his assistant Rosalie Rayner conditioned a toddler to fear a white rat by pairing it with loud, frightening noises. Though the experiment was ethically questionable, it demonstrated that emotional responses like fear could be learned through conditioning. B.F. Skinner, perhaps the most influential behaviorist, developed the theory of operant conditioning, which examined how behaviors are shaped by their consequences. Using his famous Skinner box, he showed how reinforcement, rewards, and punishment influence behavior in animals and humans. These principles underpin many modern applications in education, behavior therapy, and even organizational management. Behaviorism revolutionized psychology by grounding it in empirical research. It also laid the foundation for behavioral therapies, which use conditioning techniques to treat phobias, anxiety, and other disorders. However, critics noted that behaviorism ignored thoughts, emotions, and the subjective experience of the individual, limitations that would soon be addressed by the cognitive revolution. Section 9. Modeling and the Cognitive Turn. In the mid-20th century, psychology experienced a major shift known as the cognitive revolution. This movement reintroduced the importance of internal mental processes, such as thinking, memory, and decision-making, while still valuing the scientific rigor of behaviorism. One of the key figures in this transition was Albert Bandura, who developed social learning theory. Bandura showed that people can learn not just through direct reinforcement, but by observing others. His famous Bobo doll experiment revealed that children who watched adults behave aggressively toward a doll were more likely to imitate that behavior. This phenomenon, called modeling, demonstrated the powerful role of vicarious learning in shaping behavior. Bandura's work expanded the understanding of how behaviors, especially problematic ones, can be acquired socially. He also introduced the concept of self-efficacy, the belief in one's ability to succeed in specific situations, which became a core principle in motivation and therapy. Around the same time, researchers began studying how thoughts influence emotions and behavior. This gave rise to cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which posits that distorted or irrational thoughts can lead to emotional distress and dysfunctional behavior, and that changing these thoughts can lead to psychological improvement. CBT was influenced by pioneers like Aaron Beck, who developed cognitive therapy for depression, and Albert Ellis, who created rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT. Today, CBT is one of the most evidence-based and widely practiced forms of therapy in the world. The cognitive revolution rebalanced psychology, merging the scientific rigor of behaviorism with the complexity of internal mental life. It emphasized that how we interpret the world, not just what happens to us, shapes our emotional and psychological well-being. Conclusion: a science still in motion. The history of psychological thought is a testament to both human curiosity and humility. From exorcisms and lobotomies to CBT and neuroimaging, the field has traveled a long and complex road. Each era brought new insights and new ethical challenges that pushed the boundaries of what we know about the mind. Today, mental health science continues to evolve through neuroscience, genetic research, cross-cultural psychology, and digital mental health tools. Yet the most important lesson from history may be this: our understanding of psychological disorders must always be guided by compassion, scientific integrity, and a deep respect for human dignity. As we explore specific disorders in future episodes, we will carry forward this spirit, learning not only from the breakthroughs, but also from the mistakes. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and as always, understanding, empowering, healing together.